So if you really want to get to the heart of early Canada, we're talking 16th, 17th centuries, you've got to forget about the kings and the explorers for just a second. The real story, the one that dictates everything else, starts with the land itself. I mean, the rivers, the forests, the massive mountains. These weren't just pretty backdrops for the history books. Nope. They were active players in the game, shaping absolutely everything for everyone who called this place home. From the First Nations, who had been there for millennia, to the Europeans just showing up, chasing unimaginable wealth. Just let that sink in for a minute. What if your whole identity wasn't about your job or what country you were from, but about your deep, personal relationship with the world right outside your door? For the original peoples of this land, that was just reality. How you lived with the land was who you were. All right, here's the game plan for our journey. First, we're going to set the stage, talk about the physical land itself. Then we'll dive into the two completely different ways of seeing the world that came face to face here. We'll see how that all came to a head with the fur trade. And finally, we'll unpack the legacy of that collision, which you'll see is still with us today. So first things first, the land. Long before any people started making history, the geography of North America had already laid out the highways, the dead ends, the treasure chests, and the giant walls that would steer the course of everything to come. Just look at this map of opportunities and obstacles. You've got the Grand Banks, literally one of the richest fishing spots on the entire planet. It was like a giant magnet pulling European fishing crews all the way across the Atlantic. Then there's the St. Lawrence River. This wasn't just a river, it was a massive artery, a superhighway that let the French push deep, deep into the continent. Now the Canadian Shield, totally different story. It was impossible to farm, but it was a treasure chest of the one thing that would drive the economy for centuries, fur. And the Rockies? Well, they were a wall. Plain and simple, a 4,000-meter high stop sign that slammed the brakes on westward expansion for a very long time. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the people who had this place figured out over thousands of years. For First Nations, the land wasn't some pile of resources you conquer. It was a partner, a living thing you had to understand and live with, in balance. And this right here is the absolute key to understanding everything. It's a worldview of interconnection. The core belief was that humans are just one part of a much bigger creation, not the bosses of it. You didn't own the land with fences and legal documents. You had a relationship with it. You respected the territories the Creator had laid out. So the goal was never to bend the land to your will, but to adapt your life to the land. And you can see this genius idea of adaptation in their technology. I mean, these weren't simple or primitive tools. They were incredibly sophisticated solutions to very specific environmental challenges. The birch bark canoe? An absolute masterpiece of engineering, so light you could carry it, but tough enough for huge lakes. Out on the Pacific coast, you had massive ocean-going canoes carved from single cedar trees. Down south, the Iroquoians built huge, permanent longhouses for their farming communities. And that farming, the Three Sisters system of growing corn, beans, and squash together, it was a brilliant, symbiotic system. This is innovation born from partnership. Now, let's do a hard pivot to the newcomers. Because when Europeans looked at the very same rivers and forests, they saw something completely different. They didn't see a home, they saw a giant warehouse, a vast reservoir of stuff to be taken and used to build their empires back across the ocean. And the philosophy driving them was called mercantilism. It's a pretty simple idea, really. A colony exists for one reason and one reason only, to make the mother country rich. So Canada's job, in their eyes, was to be a supplier of raw materials: fish, timber, and above all else, fur. It was an extractive mindset from day one. And this just lays it all out, doesn't it? The clash couldn't be clearer. On one side, you have a philosophy of accommodation, of being part of a whole. On the other, a drive to exploit and to own. These two worldviews were on a collision course from the moment they met, with the same piece of land sitting right in the middle. And the arena where this collision happened? The fur trade. It became this massive economic engine that pulled these two worlds together, for better and for worse, creating a super complex web of dependence, alliances, and, yeah, a lot of conflict. You know, it's kind of crazy to think about, but a fashion trend in Europe, fancy hats made from beaver felt, is what lit the match that reshaped a whole continent. Beavers back in Europe were pretty much gone, but North America had them in numbers that just seemed endless. This demand for what they started calling soft gold became the engine for everything that came next. So let's be really clear about how this whole thing worked. The Europeans weren't the ones out there trapping. No way. They were completely dependent on the expertise and the labor of First Nations.
Indigenous trappers knew the land, they got the furs. Then, at trading posts, those furs were exchanged for European goods, stuff like metal pots, guns, and cloth. It created this system of mutual need, even if the power balance was way off. The bottom line is, without indigenous knowledge and participation, the whole fur trade enterprise would have just fizzled out. So what happens when you run this powerful economic engine fueled by these two clashing worldviews for decades and decades? Well, it didn't just make a few people rich, it completely rewired societies, economies, and the environment itself.
Which brings us to the big question, right? Yeah, the trade created huge profits and helped build an empire, but at what cost? What was the real hidden price tag on all that soft gold? The fallout was massive. Animal populations, especially beaver, were absolutely hammered. Indigenous economies, which had been totally self-sufficient, were now tied to European goods. And the competition for those goods and control of trade routes, it sparked brutal new wars between First Nations, now fought with deadly European weapons. But it also created some unique things. It led to a French empire that wasn't about big cities, but about a network of rivers and relationships. And of course, from the unions between European traders and indigenous women, a brand new people, the Métis, were born, truly the children of the fur trade. So we're left with this question. Was it a partnership or was it exploitation? The real answer is it's complicated. It was a kind of partnership, yeah, but one built on a fundamental imbalance of power and worldview. And that core tension between living with the land and taking from the land, between seeing it as a home or a storehouse, that story isn't over. Not by a long shot. It echoes in just about every major Canadian debate today, from resource projects to land rights and the long, complicated road of reconciliation.